A few weeks ago, I was sitting at the airport after a conference in New York, getting ready to work on my High Holy Day sermons. Actually, it was this sermon. I had my laptop open, a blank canvas in front of me, just waiting for words of wisdom to come out of my fingers. I had the US Open streaming on my iPad, and I wanted to listen to music from my phone on my AirPods. The goal was to be able to check scores and watch a point here and there with music that allowed me to focus when I wasn't watching. Now, I recognize the irony of talking about focusing on my writing while also utilizing 3 screens, and I would never, ever check my text during a service. But the fact that I got this text right after I talked about football and the service, and I knew exactly what it was. Brian, can we? Oh. Nope.
Wrong one.
Can we get it? If not, that's okay. Can you all see it? It's the service with football on top. So thank you, Jacob. I'm not going to say which Jacob it is. And he did say to me, don't worry, no one else is doing it. The only time I would ever check a text during. So yes, I recognize the irony of talking about focusing on writing while also utilizing 3 screens. But the bigger problem in the airport that day was that every time I started the music on my phone, the tennis on the iPad froze. And then when I started the video again, the music would stop and distracting tennis commentary would enter my ears. And if you've never heard tennis commentary, it really is the worst of all the sports commentaries. So in this moment, my AirPods couldn't figure out which device to stay loyal to. And the phone and the tablet seemed to be throwing Bluetooth punches at one another. So after 10 minutes of this back and forth, grateful for my control to not throw one of my devices at the wall, I gave up. Not with the technology, I gave up on trying to write. But then I had what I found to be a funny thought. What if I had tried to explain this problem to my Omi, my grandmother who died in 1999, 8 years before the first iPhone? And I did, by the way, recently hear 1999 called the late 1900s. So yeah, that's a thing. But 1999 was 8 years before the first iPhone. It was even before the first BlackBerry. So my Omi never owned a cell phone, although if she had, it would have looked like this. You remember those? I had fun explaining to my kids how we used to text. And this phone definitely would not have argued with an iPad over Bluetooth. My Omi wouldn't even understand the words that I was using. She would have pretended to be interested. That was just who she was. But I would have lost her for sure, just as I might have already lost some of you in trying to explain this challenge. But what I was seeing as a problem in that moment wouldn't have even registered on her scale. My favorite of my grandparents, I often think about what it would be like to share news of my life with my Omi. The way in which she would shed light on those things that we could share, real challenges in my life. But in that moment, thinking about the conversation I would love to have with her if I could, I returned to the words with which we began this evening's service. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe what we were taught. Before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it's eternally Egypt. And so I thought back even further. While I can't go all the way back to Mount Sinai, I am blessed with an incredibly detailed family tree on my Omi's side, going all the way back to Hannah and Farkas Frankel, my great-great-great-great-great-grandparents. That's only 5 greats, but it's still a lot. Hannah and Farkas lived in a small village 15 miles southeast of Bratislava, Slovakia, called Milechno, or Milchdorf, meaning milk village. There were in the village at that time 525 Catholics, 15 Protestants, and 329 Jews, with the Jews running taverns, butcher shops, engaging in small trade, and of course, with 329 Jews, there were multiple synagogues. It was there that in 1788, Hannah and Farkas Frankel had a son, Marcus, my great-great-great-great-grandfather. He's a good-looking guy, pronounced jaw, handsome. So Marcus, you see it? Yeah. Marcus, who married Eva, after whom my Omi and then, of course, my daughter were named, was a moil, but more importantly, he was what was called the Rosh Kahal, the head of the Jewish community of Milechno until he died in 1867. A Rosh Kahal in that time was a wealthy, respected leader in the community responsible for collecting taxes, representing Jews before local authorities, and managing interaction between those synagogues and the overall Jewish communal life. During those years in Slovakia, he would have seen growing opportunities in education and trade with the outside world, leading to rising ideological tension inside Jewish life. Somewhere in between the president of Jewish Federation and a temple president, Marcus would have managed all of these things and worked closely with the rabbis, the main rabbi I found being David Bistritz. I don't have a picture. We're sticking with Marcus. But Rabbi Bistritz was a student of the Chatam Sofer, who was one of the period's strongest opponents against Reform Judaism. Reform Judaism was just starting to make waves through Europe, creating a Judaism that would allow for modernization and assimilation, keeping some Jewish customs and traditions while abandoning others in order to blend in with Protestant neighbors. While the Chatam Sofer was initially able to keep reform out of Bratislava, famous for his quote, "Chadash asur min haTorah," innovation is forbidden by the Torah. There's no doubt there would have been at least a few radicals in the community, even in Milechno, who wanted mixed seating and an organ in their sanctuary. And Marcus Frankel likely would have joined his rabbi opposing it. I often ask Karl Zelanka, who was here at the early service, what his father, Rabbi Zelanka, who was rabbi here from 1930 to 1970, would think of our services today. And while Karl always tells us that he personally would prefer fewer yailais in the service, especially tonight, but he says that his dad would have loved it. I'm not sure I can say the same for my great-great-great-great-grandpa. But while he would be as confused by the drums and the screens in our sanctuary this evening as he would have been by AirPods and iPads, if I had the chance to speak to Marcus Frankel today, I think we'd have a lot to talk about. We might start with Judaism itself, the changes that were beginning in his lifetime and what they've become today. He might say something like, "Was ist this contemporary service? Why do you need to change what's been fine for 3,000 years? And he'd probably tell me that our melodies were garbage. I would argue that Judaism has always changed and evolved. And even the version of Adon Olam that he had just started singing in his synagogue in the 1850s, Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra, That was a German drinking song whose melody had been taken from the pub into the synagogue, and his cantor had inserted the traditional Hebrew. He'd raise an eyebrow, and he'd move on to critiquing us for breaking Shabbat. Well, I would tell him something else that I found in our family stories, that his granddaughter and her husband, my great-great-grandparents, were reprimanded in their synagogue for keeping their store open on Shabbat. I thought that was fun. He perhaps would tell me that Reform Judaism was ruining the future of Judaism, and I would remind him that his great-great-great-great-grandson was a rabbi, even though my great-great-grandparents didn't keep Shabbat. He'd raise his eyebrow again, and I would say, "And I'm the one with the beard." Touché, he might say, not in Yiddish. And then he would get quiet and ask, "And is it safe to be Jewish? Are there pogroms?" While his life was seemingly better than it had been for his parents and grandparents, increasing acceptance into society hardly meant the disappearance of anti-Semitism, as Jews were hated both for being too different, while feared for beginning to blend in just a little bit too much. There were blood libels, a form of anti-Semitism that had existed since the Crusades, but there was a new anti-Semitism as well. He would tell me about these attempted revolutions that had gone on throughout Europe beginning in 1848 and the fear that they stirred. In Vienna, just 40 miles away from him, one of the leaders of the revolution was a man named Adolf Fischhoff, who was Jewish. And suddenly the stereotype spread that all Jews were revolutionaries. But when the revolution failed, thanks in part to financial support from the Rothschilds, another stereotype took root, that all Jews were anti-revolutionaries, too powerful, pulling strings with money. So if you were on the right, Jews were Fischhoff. If you are on the left, Jews were Rothschilds. And either way, if you wanted to hate the Jews, you could always find a reason. While hatred against Jews up until that point had always been religiously based, this was the first time that it became political. And Marcus Frankel lived in fear of an attack against his community coming from either direction. Mleczno had remained unscathed, it seems, but in Bratislava, there had been a pogrom in the revolution's aftermath, and a Jewish community that had felt accepted by society saw their property looted and destroyed. But he would say to me, "And you know what we did after the pogrom? We came together for Shabbat like we always do. We celebrated our simchas, we mourned our losses, and we were stronger because we were together." So new, he would say? Did things get better? Is your community safe? I wouldn't have the heart to tell him about the Holocaust, the destruction of so much of our family tree and so many family trees, a systemic murder of Jews beyond his comprehension. But I would share with him that in our time, we were very much living on his same shore, experiencing hatred from all sides in a way that we hoped we had left behind. I'd tell him about security at our synagogue. He wouldn't know from a metal detector, but I know that he would be touched and inspired by the way in which our officers and security guards protect us as their family. The Kaiser wouldn't have done that for us, he'd say. And I'd share with him the struggles so many of us are feeling outside our synagogue's walls, that on that same trip to New York, I chose to wear a hat over my kippah while out in the city. Not necessarily out of a deep fear for my own safety, but it was hanging over me. And mostly I'd tell him, I just didn't want to have any unwanted conversations right now about Israel. Israel, he'd ask. The Jewish state, I'd answer. To which in astonishment he'd respond, "There's a Jewish state?" And in that moment, I would remember that as much as we shared, And as difficult as this moment in history is, we are still living in a Jewish moment that our ancestors never could have dreamed of. How incredible would it be for any of us to have the opportunity to speak to our generations past about how different and yet how similar our worlds are? It feels like this moment is so big, so heavy, and it is. But we've been there before, and we've crossed together to the other side. So maybe in the end, my Omi, and even my great-great-great-grandpa Marcus would understand more than I gave them credit for. My AirPods didn't know which device to stay loyal to, pulled between my phone and my iPad. That felt like a very modern problem in the moment. But really, it's the same problem that every generation faces. Competing priorities, competing identities, competing calls on our loyalty. Marcus's world pulled him between tradition and change, between opportunity and fear, between belonging and rejection. Ours pulls us between old melodies and new ones, between security and openness, between power and vulnerability, between fear and hope. But there's a better place, a promised land, and the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness. And there's no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. For even in our darkest moments, Jewish communities have come together each Shabbat. We've celebrated our simchas, and we've mourned our losses together. Things look different today, and the melodies have changed, but the ability to gain strength from this community has only strengthened. So that's what we'll do during these days of awe. For the next 10 days, for the next year, and God willing, for generations to come, we'll join together and move forward together as we continue our Jewish tradition of conversations with our past. We'll learn from our successes and from our mistakes. We'll celebrate our survival and strive to live up to our responsibility. We'll recognize our faults and limitations as we strive to create a better world for the future. And when we feel most alone, we'll stand on the shoulders of our ancestors and we'll embrace the support of this holy community. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's will. Amen.